Okay, first, before we get started, can everyone see me? What if I stand like this? It's like a knife blade. I am so excited to be here. This is such a treat to spend time with you guys. I really was looking forward to coming to Denmark. It's my first trip, so I've just had an amazing time. They took me from the airport. We drove around Legoland. I'm now going to be huge when I go home. I mean, huge. And to prep for this, I watched The Danish Girl. I'm not sure it helped much. I'm just saying that. I'm not sure it did. So before we get started, I should tell you that I kind of think, this is going to put a lot of pressure on you, but I kind of think this is maybe going to be one of the best presentations of my entire life, which is kind of mean to say to you, which means that you really have to perform, which also means that the rest of my career is downhill from here. But I had a sign. So last week, I was teaching a class at my facility, and I had a whole room full of field supervisors. And they're great fun to teach. We were having a marvelous time. It wasn't the best class ever. That's probably going to be you guys, but it was maybe the third best class ever in the history of mankind. I don't know if you teach field supervisors a lot. I'm getting the feeling you probably do. But generally speaking, they're an interesting audience because they basically sit in the room, cross their arms, and sort of dare you to teach you something. You're doing it now. That's the look right there, that very look. So in the middle of class, everything's going great. A guy sitting right in the center of the room, his mobile rings. Now, I should tell you that doesn't bother me at all. I don't really care. In fact, I'm oftentimes sort of relieved it's their phone and not my phone. But this guy's looking at me, his mobile's ringing, I'm looking at him, he's looking back at me, and he's just like frozen in space. And I think, maybe he doesn't know what to do. And so I say to him, "Sir, if you need to get that, you may." And he looks visibly relieved, and he picks up the phone and he answers it. The only problem is he takes the rest of the phone call and doesn't leave the room. And it's kind of my fault because I said he could, right? So he picks up the phone and he goes, "Yeah," which I think is how operations people say good morning. I'm not sure. I was translating it loosely. Then he says, "I'm in class." And there's a big long pause, and he goes, "All day." And that one had a blade in it. I felt that. And then he says, this is totally true. He says the most amazing thing. This happened last week. He says, "Doesn't suck as much as I thought it would." If you're okay, that's kind of where I'd like to make the standard for my presentation, okay? It's going to be awful, but it's not nearly as awful as it could potentially be. Let me start by making one statement that I think is pretty bold, and then I want to actually ask your advice. But the first statement I want to make is this. I want to challenge you straight to your face that in your industry, doing the work you do, more rules will not make you more safe. Like you could have 50 more rules that say don't cut your hand, and it doesn't mean you're 50 times less likely to cut your hand. And maybe the way to get into this discussion is to actually ask your advice. I don't know how free you're feeling with your intellectual property right now, but I'd sort of like to borrow. So in early December of last year, I'm sitting in my office trying to hide because December's a really good month to be at work, but not that good of a month to do work. I don't know if you feel that way. Like I love being at work because every meeting has either cake or cookies, and the good meetings have both, right? So I'm always kind of just hanging out in December because everything's kind of a party, and the phone rings. And it's a major oil and gas company, and they call me and they say, "We've had an accident. Can you come and help us do a peer assist around the human performance, human factors?" And it's December, it's the second week, cake is being served not even 10 feet away from my office, and I'm thinking, I don't want to do this. So I ask a simple question. Was someone injured? Were there a fatality? And they said, "No, it's entirely a property damage event." Well, now between us, now I don't give a crap at all, right? I mean, it's not a big deal at all. So I say, "I really like to, but I'm super busy. There's no way I can get it on my schedule. I'd love to. You guys are so great." And they just kept saying, "Please, please, please." And I just kept saying, "I just don't see I can work it in." And at one point, the man on the phone said, "The event happened in the Gulf of Thailand. We'd have to put you up in a beach resort, and you can take your family." Suddenly, my calendar cleared. Right? I mean, just like, hello. So we go over there, and they have this event. Now, what's interesting about this event, and you guys will get this, is that a temporary loading platform for offshore support vessels for the natural gas platforms that exist in the Gulf of Thailand. And the accident actually happened at this temporary loading platform. Now, before I go any further, let me ask you guys just straight up, what is your definition of the word temporary? Anyone? Yeah, so I asked my guys, and they said 25 years unless we need it longer. So this platform is set up. They basically took the beach and dredged it so it was deep and steep. They could bring a barge right alongside, and they had a temporary construction crane set up on a concrete pad. It had been open for 12 years. 12 years. And what's fascinating to me is that the crew of Thai workers that have operated that platform, they had been working in that loading station for pretty much since the day it began. So we have a really consistent 3 vessels a day, event-free, perfect team of people who constantly are loading these vessels, except for the one that I get to go to Thailand for. Now, the way they were loading these vessels, this kind of, Peter, fits into the heavy lift thing, is they were using something that they call super sacks. Do you guys know what those are? Does that translate? So they're big kind of 1-ton bags that have loops on the top of them. There's 4. It's a really good way to, for instance, move sand. If you have to move a lot of sand with a crane, you want a super sack, because if you're just using the hook, it takes a really long time. And Peter said earlier that the rigging is really where crane lifts happen, and he's exactly right. And these super sacks are really efficient because they almost remove entirely the rigging problem. Because you basically hook those loops up 1, 3, 2, 4. And when you do the lift, the sack pulls together, they swing it over to the vessel, put the sack down, voila, it's loaded. This one they dropped was the last load of the day. Because all my stories pretty much start with last load of the day or best guy on the crew. Okay, that's how they all start. This was last load of the day. And for some amazing reason, instead of hooking the loops up 1, 3, 2, 4, they took a piece of nylon line and they tied a whole bunch of knots and they tied those 4 loops together. Then they tied this nylon line onto the crane hook. You with me so far? Do you know how this is going to end? Okay, they're going to drop it. Because if they don't drop it, this is the stupidest story I've ever told. They do the pick, they lift the load, and they're swinging it through an exclusion zone. Now, they had just had a big anti-drop program, and they had actually created 2 sets of temporary fences and big red X's on the beach. And when they did the lift, they were swinging it through that exclusion zone. Those knots came undone in that nylon line, and the load fell. Now, it didn't hit anybody. Nobody was injured. But in fact, it was a pretty elaborate piece of property, more than $1 million, and it was damaged in the fall. Now, here's where I need your advice. In your opinion, and when I say that, I have to accept whatever crap you say, so I'm wide open to it. In your opinion, is that a success or a failure? I'm saying this out loud, right? Because you're all looking at me like I'm thinking, maybe I'm just thinking these things. Let's vote. You want to? That might be a good way to do this. How many of you in this room think it's a success? Just by show of hands. Pretty good. Okay. How many of you think it's a failure? Okay. How many of you just don't give a crap? It's 3 o'clock. I've been in these chairs a long time, right? Well, I think it's interesting because when you heard earlier about the notion of leadership being a deliberate strategy, one of the things I want to share with you is the way we respond to failure is also a deliberate strategy. In fact, I will tell you that if you're very interested in safe and reliable operations, that's a success. They identified the risk. They mitigated the risk. That was for you, Gordon. They put up a little fence, and when they dropped the load, it landed exactly where they predicted it would fall and hurt nobody. If you're interested in operations, that was a failure. Because their whole job is to load that vessel, and they didn't get the job done. What's interesting is that what I'd suggest to you guys is that it's both. And this notion of a successful failure has to enter your vocabulary. In fact, the sooner, the better. And maybe the best way to illustrate that is to tell you one more little story. So I had a tragic thing happen just the other day. I got on a plane. It was a small domestic flight. I sat down in my seat. I was in a middle seat, which isn't so bad for me, but really sucks for the people on either side of me. Seriously, it's not. The fat guy's never really in pain. You guys are hurt, but I'm fine, right? I know it's a 2-hour flight. I get out my phone. I hold it to my face, and I have a tragedy. The battery is dead. I will have to spend the next 2 hours without my mobile. I don't know what I'm going to do. I kind of think life's over. And then I look up, and in the seat back pocket in front of me, there's a newspaper. And I think, I used to know how to run one of these. So I pick it up. And maybe you guys saw this. About a month ago, Volvo, the car company, put an article out, and the headline said, by the year 2020, Volvo is going to make a fatality-free car. What do you think about that? Did anyone read it? If you didn't read it, you should look it up. It's really available. What do you think about it? Good idea, bad idea? So here's how today will work. I'll look at you lovingly. That's what's going on right now. When I do that and I ask you questions, you should say stuff back to me. It helps, right? But what do you think? Good idea or bad idea? Yeah, good? Is it possible? Is it aspirational? Except that Volvo put this out. By the year 2020, I would think there's a room full of lawyers somewhere in Sweden that had a big talk about this before it went out. Wouldn't you think? I'm just saying, by the year 2020. So you know what I did? Read the article. And it said, no one has died in a Volvo since 2009. So maybe the question I'd want to ask you is, does Volvo already make a fatality-free car? In fact, is the idea of a fatality-free car even a concept you could carry? Could I look you in the eye and you could tell me you have a fatality-free platform or a fatality-free vessel? How would they do it? Let's talk about it. In your opinion, what's the most important safety feature in a vehicle? Driver? Okay, that's good. What else? Other drivers? Okay, that's good. We've got a lot of drivers going on here. Brakes is really good. Anybody else? Seatbelt, nice work. Anybody else? Co-driver. Okay, we got 3 drivers now driving this car. You dangs, it must take you forever to get any place, right? Everyone's driving the damn car. Who else? What'd you call me? It's Dr. Airbag to you, okay? Let's get that said, okay. It's a little forward. Oh, you mean air, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So this is an excellent list. Let me start with seatbelts. What's a seatbelt's job? Restraint? Y'all keeps you in the car. Everybody good with that? So are you going to be shocked if I tell you that a seatbelt's primary function is no longer restraint? Did you know this? You didn't know this. What would be the next question you'd want to ask me? Yeah, no, that would be really a good question. And well, what's it for then? It has to do with airbags. So let me ask this question. What is the European standard for a 2016 four-door sedan? What's the minimum number of airbags a car sold in Europe can have? Who can tell me? 6 is actually really low, surprisingly low. 8's higher than 6. You're moving in the right direction. That's good. 100? Okay, we're between 100 and 8. Do you know this? So the European standard for airbags is between 13 and 16, and depending on your vehicle, really, most cars overperform the airbag. In fact, I'm fixated with Mini Coopers. I love Mini Coopers. I don't know if you like them. That is the cutest car. The problem is I look at it and think, would I drive it or wear it like a Speedo? You're a visual thinker, aren't you? You are. He vomited a little like that when I said that. If there's 16 airbags in your car, what's a seatbelt's job? Think. In fact, what it does is it ensures the positioning of the occupants of the vehicle so that the car performs the way the engineers have designed cars to perform. Cars are amazing. If you think about cars, and I really want you to think about cars, cars changed dramatically around 1954, 55, 56. In fact, what happened is car designers said, asking drivers not to wreck doesn't seem to be that good of a defense, right? Instead of managing vehicle accidents based upon probability, why don't we assume that everybody driving in every car all the time has a 100% chance of wrecking? And instead of asking drivers to not crash, let's make a vehicle that manages the consequence of the inevitable crash that will happen. And if you think about your car, and I don't know if you have, your car's got about 2,400 active safeguards built into the system. My favorite one are bumpers. In your lifetime, bumpers have changed. What did bumpers used to be in the good old days? Yeah, good. Don't overthink this next question. And what was a bumper's job in the good old days? Yeah, to bump. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah, you can leave early. That's a really good answer, right? What's a bumper made out of now? What's a bumper's job now? Yeah, in fact, a bumper really isolates the energy of the accident away from the passenger compartment. Your car is designed to wreck safely. This is pretty remarkable because when you think about that, I'm going to tell you that our highway safety numbers, our highway fatality numbers have dramatically improved since 1954. But the next question I'd ask you is this one. Are drivers any better? Are drivers better now than they were 20 years ago? Why not? They're more distracted. They're less drunk. I mean, that's kind of going on. Or maybe I should say more sober. Sorry, I meant to say it that way. Right? What's amazing is we actually took vehicle safety and dramatically changed the outcome, and we did it almost entirely by understanding that the driver is the most important part of vehicle safety while simultaneously the least reliable part of vehicle safety. That challenge is right where you are. Because all day long, I've heard these incredible presentations that basically look you in the eye and say, if we cared more, we'd hurt less people. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. I don't know how to get you to care more. What I have to do is get you to redefine what safety success is. I think we see safety as an outcome to be achieved, when in fact, I would like to suggest that safety is not an outcome to be achieved. Safety is a capacity that you manage in real time the entire way. Volvo did not say their cars would not wreck. In fact, Volvo is betting somebody's going to drive off a bridge someplace. What they said is, when the inevitable failure happens, we're going to manage the consequence, and it's going to be impossible to die in our car. That shift in thinking is huge. And to get there, we have to sort of have a discussion about what our targets are. Because we cannot measure the validity of our safety programs by counting the number of people that we hurt. That's stupid. In fact, I'll just say it to you. I'm American, so I can. We suck at managing accidents because they're accidents. They're unintentional deviations from an expected outcome. I promise you, everyone in this room, if I said at 3:20, somebody's going to fall down that first set of stairs because they're not holding the handrail, I'll bet you a nickel. At 3:18, there'll be 35 of you with pillows and cake, because it's out there, waiting to catch the person when they fall. We're not good at managing accidents, but we're stunningly good at managing the capacity to do work safely. And what's crazy is technically you do this all the time. Technically, you manage the capacity to raise and lower your ability to do work with the markets, with the demand. That same idea is what carries us in our discussion around safety. Let me show a couple slides, because we went to quite a bit of work to get this crap set up, so I should use it. Now, the first slide, probably you're going to want to break into small groups and have a discussion, but don't. Just sit there, look pretty, and shut up. We'll have a big discussion about this slide. But I do think this slide sort of sets the theme for the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So I'll give you some time to look at it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my first slide. Here it is. Did anyone not know this? In the United States, we actually call this a brownout. I don't know what you'd call it here in Denmark. I should tell you a story about this slide. Actually, that seems like it would be gross if I had a story about this slide, But I should sort of tell you where this slide comes from. So I wrote this book. You heard it's called The Pre-Accident Investigation, and it's the #1 selling safety book in the world. And I promise you guys that I'm not bragging because it's a safety book. If you sell like 47, you get to be #1. And my mom bought like 9, so I'm pretty sure she took me over to the top. But they asked me to speak at this big safety meeting in Las Vegas. So there's 6,000 safety professionals in this giant ballroom in a casino in Las Vegas. I don't know if you guys have hung out with safety people, but generally speaking, they're not that much fun. You know what I mean? And like 6,000 times isn't 6,000 better. You know what I mean? It was kind of everyone used the handrail though. Super good handrail use, I will say that in Vegas. So I have to give this presentation, and so I'm the keynote guy, and I think, what am I going to do? I think I'll use this laxative slide because I can't really think of a reason to not use it. I pop it up. It gets an okay response. It kind of breaks the ice, and I'm getting ready to give the rest of my presentation. And I look down, and I look back up. This is totally true. And in the back of the room, there's a guy with his hand up. And I think, I never really imagined this slide would get a question. You know what I mean? Like if I had a question on this slide, probably wouldn't ask anybody. Might Google it later, but probably not something I'd want to discuss. Now I'm in this dilemma where I don't know what to do, because a good presenter, I think, would ignore the guy and go on. But if you ignored the guy, you'd never know what he was going to ask. And I was really curious what he was going to ask. So I stopped the entire meeting and said, sir, do you have this is totally true. Sir, do you have a question? The guy stands up in the back of a room, and from across 6,000 people says, does the order you take them in make a difference? So I added this line. Here's where I want you to think. I want you to think about the fact that the target we're using is wrong. The target we're using has its value and measure negatives. And I actually think safety is not a good system when we value and measure the negative. Safety is not the absence of accidents. For us, safety is really the presence of defenses, of safeguards and barriers and controls. But if you really push me, and this is what the Volvo article really talked about, safety is the presence of capacity. We have the capacity to fail safely. Now, I want to tell you, failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is an enormously important part of how operations happen. In fact, what we do is we go out, we screw up, we learn from it, we get smarter, and we go out the next day and we screw up way better than we did the day before, right? Some of you have been working so long, I can't even tell you're screwing up anymore. That's how good you are. The challenge is, once you change your definition of safety, it changes the way you understand and look at operational safety. Because if I tell you accidents are inevitable, then suddenly you build capacity for your systems to fail as safely as possible. And when they do fail, that safe failure is probably a success. Let me take it one step further. I think I can describe what it's like to work in Denmark. You tell me if I'm wrong. I think your workers generally are as safe as they need to be. Without being overly safe, because there's a strong value in independence here culturally, in order to get their work done. Workers are as safe as they need to be without being overly safe in order to get their work done. What do you think about this slide? I showed this the other day, and this lady said, that slide is offensive. And I said, no, actually, the laxative slide was offensive. That was right on the edge. This is not that offensive. Do you think this is true? Who's got a pretty good drive to the office that's kind of up in this area? I'm not looking at you, green striped shirt guy, but I'm not looking at you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. You know when you look away, I'm still here, right? How far's your commute? How far's your drive to work? Yeah, anybody. They're all looking at me like, I didn't sign up for this. You talk, I'm just going to look pretty right now. How far's your commute? So 1 hour. You drive every morning you drive 1 hour, and then every night you drive 1 hour back. So when you're driving, how do you know you're safe enough while you're driving? So you don't feel safe. And yet you still go to work? I actually would push you on that, because I think if you didn't feel safe, you probably wouldn't drive. I certainly wouldn't drive if I didn't feel safe. How do you know you're safe enough while you're driving? Help her out. This is a hard question. Skills. But are skills alone sufficient enough to actually create safety? But skills are important, right? Well, how do you know you're safe enough while you're driving? Talk to me. Confidence, I think confidence is really important unless you go too far, and then it becomes overconfidence, and that's terrible, but that's good. What else? Rules. Rules seem to be valuable. Do you actually follow rules? So have you ever gone faster than the posted speed limit? There's really only 3 speeds. There's your speed, which is appropriate for the current conditions. There are the morons driving slower than you, and the idiots driving faster than you. That's pretty much the gradient. How do you know you're safe enough when you drive? Because if you're not thinking ahead, I can replace the word drive with work in an instant. My issue here is that when you're driving, you don't know you're safe enough. I always kind of secretly hope someone will scream out, I got to work safely, right? I didn't have an accident. And I would say, that is a super sexy metric. It's easy to measure, but it means nothing because you didn't answer the question I asked. When you're working, it's very difficult to not see safety as an outcome. At the end of the project, no injuries, safe project. When in reality, we have a challenge. And the challenge is our perception of risk is that it is permanent. You do a good enough risk assessment, you write a good enough hazard control plan, you put in the right mitigations, you train people, and you write damn good procedures, you'll never have an accident. The problem is that in reality, risk is incredibly fluid. When you're driving, you don't know if you're safe enough except moment by moment by moment. You're constantly managing in real time the risk as you experience it. And our challenge is to realize that this is a huge part of what we think about. But here's where I'll push you on this. What amazes me about this is that for the most part, your workers are stunningly good at this. Crazy good, amazingly good at this, until they're not. This is from my employee parking lot. I'm not proud of this, but I feel like I should share it. Some of our messaging has gone bad, right? Here's what's so interesting to me, and I want you to think about it as well. Ultimately, I want you to think about the work in this little model. This is my picture of a sharp stick, and let's populate it. At the very pointy end of the stick are the guys in flame retardant coveralls, right? The guys touching the work, the tool pushers. Behind them, probably most of you guys, behind them, the company and the customer, and at the very, very blunt end of this stick is the regulator. Who's most likely to get injured on this model? Pointy end of the stick. They have the highest injury potential. Here's question 2. Who's got the most influence over the things that hurt workers? Yeah, it's crazy. The power moves in the opposite direction. In fact, the blunt end is in charge of right tools, right equipment, right parts. And that little suite is huge. Where you are on this stick absolutely colors how you see the future. Safety is different on the pointy end than it is on the blunt end. In fact, I'll tell you, I sat at a table filled with young and handsome managing directors. Probably very few of them have cut their hand on a platform in a long time. And if they did, I would not want to be on that tour with them, right? That would not be the best one to be on, right? The exposure's higher at the pointy end, and that really is a big part of where this all moves. So where's this take us? Well, let me just show you kind of a simple model. Every accident, every event has 3 parts. There's the context. That's everything that leads up to the consequence. That's the bad outcome. And then there's the retrospective way we see the event after it takes place. So I have context, consequence, retrospect. Now let me ask kind of a weird question. Which one of these 3 components of an event, context, consequence, or retrospect, in your opinion, is least interesting? So I got 1 vote for retrospect. I love the fact that you played out loud. Thank you for participating. Wrong. You just said consequence. And I think someone in the back said consequence as well. How can consequence be the least interesting part of an accident? Because I'll bet you, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'll bet you do risk ranking. I'll bet you look at a near miss and say, this was high probability, this is medium probability, this is low probability. When in fact, what I'm about to tell you is your love affair with consequence is leading you astray. The reason consequence is not very interesting is because it's already happened. It's too late to try to stop the consequence, but really, for all the engineers in this room, consequence is seductive because it obeys the laws of physics, but it's not terribly interesting. Why do people cut their hands? Don't overthink this. Sharp stuff. Yep, there you go. That's the answer. Why do people fall down? Gravity, right? Seriously, that's the reason, right? The biggest energy you deal with in a crane lift, Peter, is gravity. And it's always there. It's a law. That's how much we like the word gravity. What's interesting to me is that if we spend time reacting to consequence, what we're missing is the opportunity to respond to context. Now, I'm going to say something bold, and that is you will not prevent the next fatality by studying the last accident. In fact, if I could do anything for you, it would be to get you to see safety as a capacity to be managed, and that you'd become fixated in sort of asking capacity questions while operations are successful. Because the only way to stop a fatality is to understand successful work. Because that's where we can make a difference. That's where we can influence this model. Here's what we know. Workers don't cause accidents. What workers do is trigger a whole set of latent conditions, sharp things, soft tissue, gravity, that exists in the system all along. Now, if you think this is right, let me ask you one more question. We have a high need for seductively unambiguous cause. We want to know what went wrong, and then we want to fix it. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. Stop it. The enemy of the question is always the answer. And you heard this morning, not knowing is a much more powerful position than knowing. When an event happens in one of your sites, the question you want to ask is, explain to me how this happened. Let's do one, okay? What's the problem? Yeah, I know you're good. Wide load's good, heavy load's good. That's not the problem. What's the problem? Don't overthink this. Say that again. Oh, center, gravity, that's good too, but that's not the problem. What's the problem? It's not a Volvo. That's very good. A little bit twitty, but that's good, right? You want to know what the problem is? It's funny. If this room was filled with coveralls, we'd have the answer in about 2 seconds. Ready? Wrong tool. Right? He took a van to a lorry job. Is he a bad guy? How close would you follow him on the road? There's 46 pallets on this. So I took this picture. I know nothing about this, except after I took the picture, I went out to talk to the guy, and he looked at me, and he drove away as fast as possible. I'm pretty sure he thought, nothing that big guy's got to say I want to hear, and he drove out, right? Here's what I'll tell you. If you're fixated on consequence, you're going to look at this and say, bad guy, bad decision. If you're fixated on context, you're going to ask a much different question. Because I know nothing about this picture. I took it, but I know nothing about it except for one thing. He did not accidentally do this. He didn't turn around and go, crap, I accidentally put 46 pallets on top of a van. Right? This was a substantive, actually pretty extensive act that I think requires experience. In fact, one of the challenges is I think we've given the wrong tool. I think we tell you to look at this and ask the elusive incentive question. Why would a worker do this? But in fact, I'd be much more interested if you asked the richer context question. How? How did this happen? And the best way to do this is let's just try one. Why would you put 46 pallets on a van? Didn't have a truck. Perfect answer. Question 2, ready? How would you put 46 pallets on a van? And very carefully is a crappy answer. I'm not accepting that. How would you do this? You honestly think one at a time? So I will tell you, I'm fairly certain. Have you ever moved a pallet? You lose interest at about 2. They're just like, ugh, this is terrible. My guess is the way he did this was he found a big piece of flat concrete and gravity was his friend. And he stacked them up really neatly. And you can tell because the top pallet is upside down. And you see those big tie downs, those straps on either side? They're woven through the top and woven through the bottom. He got that bundle as tight as he could. He cinched those straps down. If he's a good hand, he went and got a cheater bar and took a couple more pulls on it. Then he got a fork, picked those up, put them on that ladder rack, jumped out, probably tied it to the ladder rack, pulled the fork out, and drove away. Here's my question. Which one gives you more operational data? Which one gives you more things to understand and fix? We have to stop seeing workers as the problem and start understanding that really the workers are the solution. Workers aren't a problem that needs to be fixed. We don't need to ask our workers to care more, try harder, and always remember. For the most part, the workers that work for you want more than anything to do a great job. What we want to do is tap those workers as a way to understand and learn what's going on. Because ultimately, workers are the masters of the complex adaptive behavior work does. When I was asking you about driving, that was a super unfair question, and I hope you accept my apology. It was very mean to do to you. But I was secretly thinking of this chart. When you drive, you know when it's safe to drive. You also absolutely know when it's not safe to drive. The problem is that I never put you in 100% safe, because I'm not sure that exists in your industry. And God forbid I would ever put you in 100% danger, because that would be terrible. I somehow put you in the middle, the gray area, the uncertain interpretation of when safe is safe enough. And then, if that's not complicated enough, I add normal variability. I add sea state, weather, personality, fatigue. We can make a list a mile long. And what's amazing to me is this is where we put workers in the field, and this is where we ask workers to make safe operating decisions. When do I know exactly when you weren't safe enough to drive to work? As soon as you wreck. A wreck looks like this. The line is crystal clear. It's seductively unambiguous. I could tell you exactly where the worker should have zigged instead of zagged. The problem is this is what we investigate, but this is what happened. Our challenge is to really understand that this is the story of safety capacity in your facility. This is what you want to look at and understand. Let's take one more slide, then we're out of here. This black line represents how we believe work happens. This is what we write procedures to. This is what we do production numbers for. This is how we train people. This is how we equip people. This is how we buy safety glasses. The black line is exactly what's going to happen. This is what workers go out to do. Everybody got it? If that's the black line, what's this line? Yeah, so I'm not telling you anything, but you've never done a job in your entire career in this industry that didn't have a black line and a blue line. And what's amazing is that I hire you not to obediently follow the rules, but actually to safely adapt to the actual current conditions. And if you really push me, and I'm really learning this, your workers probably spend as much time overperforming your systems as they do underperforming your systems. And what's amazing to me about this is that this variability happens every single day. And yet, how long would it take me at your facility to find an investigation that had these words on it? Worker failed to follow procedure. How long would that take me? Take your time. They pay me by the hour. I said that the other day, and those foremen, some guy in the back says, they're paying us by the hour too. So I just stood there quietly, but everyone was getting paid. So. What's wrong with the phrase, worker failed to follow procedure? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is it means your investigation has focused on what failed to happen. And in your zeal to tell me what didn't happen, what you're missing is the blue line. I only care about what happened. I never want to see a finding that says worker failed to adequately identify hazard. I much rather would like to hear a story of how we got good 30-year workers last load of the day to drop a $1 million piece of equipment out of a cloth bag in the beach in Thailand. And the crazy thing about my story is that the one person I wanted to ask that question of, the crane operator, they fired him. That's how come it was last load of the day. It happened at like 9:15 in the morning, but when you fire the crane operator, you don't get to do any more loads. That's how, in fact, it screwed up the whole week, right? What they missed was the chance to talk to the person who really knows. Now, we can take this one step farther and tell you that hazards are fluid and they move, As workers are adapting, they're constantly sort of accepting hazards, and those hazards sort of create the potential for that failure to happen. That's our challenge, and that's where we are. We have to be at a point where really the target we're shooting for has changed. Safety is not everybody goes home safely, and yet safety is everybody goes home safely. Safety is actually the presence of capacity at that work site for you to have events that are injury-free. And that's what Volvo does. Let's do one more thing before we're out of here. Stand up next to your chair and grab a pin off the table. You can do this. It'll feel good, actually, standing up from these chairs. I don't know if you've noticed that. Okay? This next part's a little technical, so pay attention. Point your pin towards the ceiling. This isn't the technical part. Okay, now, here it is. Draw a clockwise circle on the ceiling. If you don't know which direction that is, look for somebody really confident and copy off them. Okay? Everybody got it? Always up and always clockwise? Now, very carefully, bring the pin straight down. Still up and clockwise, still up and clockwise. Look down at it and tell me what direction the circle's going now. I know it's like I'm a miracle worker, isn't it? It's like I'm Harry, what's his name? Harry Porter? I'm Harry Porter. Do you need more time, sir? Take as long as you want. Yeah. It's amazing. How'd that happen? What changed? That's exactly what I'm asking you. I don't have any goals. I don't think I even know anything special. Here's what I'll tell you. Ultimately, what I got to get you to do is understand that safety has two distinct perspectives. There's the view from below, and you could bring 100 attorneys and 6 auditors, and they will tell you this is a clockwise circle. And there's the view from above, same attorneys, same auditors, counterclockwise circle. What's crazy is that the worker action didn't change at all. What changed is how we look at it. Thanks for your time, you guys. This has been the best conference ever. Standing ovation. Standing, amazing.